Okay, good morning to those who are watching the recording. Actually, it's not necessarily morning when you're watching, whatever it is you're watching. Hello. We are not meeting next week, so do not expect a recording for next week's class. There won't be one, but we will resume in 2 weeks. And what we're doing, we are continuing our discussion about personal status. We started our discussion last week on this question of the Mamzer Rabbi, a case, just to quickly review, of a rabbi. Actually, it was Australia. I did find that out where this happened, whose mother during the Holocaust assumed that her first husband had died because he'd been taken away by the Nazis. She remarried, had children. One of the children became a prominent rabbi, but turned out that the first husband was not murdered by the Nazis. And he came, and so the rabbi from Australia went to a rabbi in New York, a very well-known rabbi who actually was known for some of the decisions that he made during the Holocaust and published books about his decisions during the Holocaust. And he was technically a mamzer, again, which is technically a person whose parents either were whose mother was married to someone else when he was born. Now, technically, his mother was still married to the first husband because she mistakenly believed he was dead. So the rabbi, through no fault of his own, was technically a mamzer, and the rabbi who was making this decision said that he had to give up his position, divorce his wife, and didn't look for any more proof, it would seem, from that person who came forward to say that he was the first husband. And so we looked at this issue of looking at this issue of mamzerut, right? And we're going to take a look at a second text. This is from Rabbi Spitz,
Good. Thank you.
who is a conservative rabbi, and he's going to be looking at it for the excuse me, for the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, which is the highest level of decision making on Jewish legal issues in the conservative movement. And it'll be framed, let me say this, it's a real ethical issue in that here is someone who is being penalized through no fault of their own. The child is being penalized, not as an English law because the parents weren't married to each other. That's irrelevant. The child is being penalized because he is the child of a union that is forbidden by the Torah because the mother was already married to somebody else, i.e., it's adulterous, or mistakenly believes that there's a previous husband has died and has not died, or has not received a Jewish divorce from a previous spouse and remarries and has children with a second spouse, but because there was no Jewish divorce from the first spouse, she is considered to be still married to the first spouse, and the second marriage is any children from the second marriage is also a children of a forbidden union. Okay, so he's going to start with this issue of ethics. I mean, here's a larger question. How do we handle a situation in which it is disturbing to our ethical teachings, but is a law from either the Torah or the rabbis or Jewish law, but the ethical learnings, and where do our ethical learnings come from? Our ethical learnings come from also from the values from the Torah, and there's a conflict. What do you do? Now, we saw in the first case with Rabbi Ashri and the rabbi who finds later in life that he is a mamzer, that case is decided that this is what the law says, and this is what you have to do. He seems to be disturbed by it, but doesn't say that there's anything other than we have to apply the law here. So the question that Rabbi Spitz is going to talk about, and these are questions from Rabbi Barmash from her book, Modern Responsa. And she's going to, he decides to call attention to the ethical problems, right? And this question of innocent children, of, what should happen to them? And the question is, what is happening in contemporary times? Is this issue, remember, if we said last week, well, there's such a severe punishment for these relations. Obviously, you have a severe punishment in place because you want to prevent the behavior. Some people say that's why we have the death penalty. If you have the death penalty, that will prevent people from committing crimes that are capital crimes. That is often given as the rationale. And we see that certainly in ancient times, that was a rationale. Yeah. I'm not going to get right here into the discussion about that particular issue, whether or not the capital punishment has any effect on the commission of capital crimes. But the question here for the Torah seems to be, let's have a very severe punishment, because we have some very condemned behaviors, and we want to prevent. Okay, and that's this question: halacha, Jewish law, is it influenced by morality? If we see something that's not moral, how should the law be? If what's the law? What should be the law? Okay, so those are sort of the general backgrounds. And again, he's a conservative rabbi, so he's allowing into this discussion some of these moral and ethical issues, and he's trying also, as we'll see, trying to see both the origins of these ethical issues, and as often happens, as we've seen in these discussions, what are there other parallels? Are there other examples within Jewish law and tradition and the Bible and the Talmud and other places where these issues might give us some insight, excuse me, into what we might want to do today? Okay, so that's the general introduction. So we're going to take a look at Rabbi Spitz's document. Okay, any comments or questions before we begin taking a look at Rabbi Spitz's document? Okay, all right. So this is a question that was brought to the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, March 2020, 25 years ago. And it passed 15-3. So clearly the vast majority, excuse me, of the rabbis agreed with him. I don't know if some of you may know Judah Kogan. He used to live in oh no, I'm sorry, it's Avi Kogan. That's the Avi, the Kogan that lived in Fairlawn. That's his brother. Okay. So here's the question: is mamzerut operative in our community? Should we still have mamzerim?
Am I the only one having trouble reading this?
Is it too small? I thought I made it.
Yeah.
Is it coming out small?
It's small and it's unclear.
Really? All right, let me, I thought I'd made it larger. Let me go out of it. Okay. And I'll try to bring it back up and see if I can bring it back up in a larger, I know it is, I know in the original it is small, but I thought I had,
Looked
larger.
okay to me. Jerry, you can make it larger on your computer.
I tried that.
Okay.
Yeah, I tried that too. It
Didn't work?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna make it
It,
larger.
it gets larger and then it goes back to the original size.
Okay, let me go back to where we were. Here we are. And let's go back to share. Here, I have it here. See how that works. Does that look bigger now? On my screen, it's fairly large.
Yeah, it's fairly, see, it went back down, mine went back down to the regular size. To the,
On my screen, it's larger.
It's larger than it
know what-
was in mine, but it's very blurry.
I don't know what
On my,
I don't know how much I have. Ed, do I have much control over
okay,
this?
that's good. No, went back.
That's what I'm doing what I can on my screen.
Okay. Something's
Uh,
wrong someplace.
I'll make the assumption that it might be difficult for some people to read, so I'll try to read.
Yeah,
But some of you, is it clear on, Jerry, is it clear on your screen now?
it's not on the,
Clearer, but it's difficult to read.
Carol, can you read it?
Yes.
not on mine
I
now.
also have the printed copy.
Oh, okay. All right, so we'll just work on this. I'll try to do what I can. Charlie, what does it look like on your screen?
It's okay. It's not that great, but it's readable. I'm
Okay.
talking about the bottom text, not the top. But
That's funny because I did try to make it as large as I can. Okay. So I'll try to talk about it without, if you can't read it, I'll try to do what I can. Okay. So the question is, is Mamzeut operative? And then Rabbi Spitz asks, why is this teshuva necessary? Why do I have to do, why am I writing this 29-page document? The committee has already said the institution of Mamzerut is inoperative. This was contained in the minutes of steering committee. However, there is no record of a vote, no discussion. In other words, in the past, the committee just said, well, it's not operative. Goodbye. Next item on the agenda, please. So, usually, as he points out, there needs to be a full analysis. So, so he says we need a full analysis to provide, excuse me, to provide the underlying legal reasons to stand. Okay, so he begins trying to understand what exactly is the mamzer. And again, it's not a bastard, it's not a child whose parents aren't married to each other. That's irrelevant. Okay. In the Torah, a mamzer lo yavo mamzer b'kal Adonai, a mamzer shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. By the way, notice, what does that mean? Does that mean that he can't walk into the synagogue or the temple? What does it mean he can't enter into the lo yavo mamzer? The only place in the Torah in which the term mamzer is used. Interesting, as in sometimes happens. You read a text and the wherever this text was originally written, the assumption is you know what they're talking about, right? So it just says it. And what does it mean to not enter? Is it literally for 10 generations, even in the 10th generation? Does that mean on the 11th generation you're in? I don't know. And why is the punishment so severe? Okay, so later on in the Bible, we do read in the prophetic book of Zechariah, and the mamzers shall dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. Also, as you can see, unclear. It's obscure. So you have to go to the time of the rabbis, the time of the Talmud after the Bible, and they ask very simply, "What's a mamzer?" Because they need to define this as well. We have this biblical verse, and how do we apply it if we don't know what we're talking about? The offspring of any union of near relationships to which the term "he shall not come" applies. And then there's another definition. These are the words of Rabbi Shimon of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon of Teman says, the offspring of any human, which the penalty is excision at karet, at the hand of God. Whatever, and so it's a little unclear. Okay. The Mishnah states the halacha is as Rabbi Shimon. All right, so this is the definition. A child born of incest, where the union is prohibited by Jewish law. Okay. Child born of sexual intercourse of a married woman with a man other than her lawful husband. Polygamy was allowable. So this only applies. Yes, this is unequal. This is sexist. This is only about women. Yes, okay, fine. That's the way it was. The child of a woman who, acting under the assumption that her husband had died, remarried, and had a child from the second husband. That was the case we had before. When her first husband is proved to be alive, the child from the second marriage is a mamzer. Okay, fine. So that's, that's what we have. And what does it mean? That original biblical verse is to be kept out of the assembly of the Lord. So does that mean that the worst thing that mamzer can do, you know what? You can't go into the temple in Jerusalem. You could interpret that verse to say you can't enter into the assembly of the Lord just to mean, sorry, you can't go to the temple. But the rabbis understood the phrase more broadly, kept out of the assembly of the God, as prohibiting the marriage between a mamzer and an Israelite. As we said before, a mamzer could marry another mamzer, someone who converts to Judaism, or a freed slave, or a non-Jew. All right. If a mamzer married an ordinary Jew, the penalty was lashes and immediate divorce, and their offsprings were mamzerim, which is again the case we had before. All right. Now, mamzer was still a Jew, and all the other rules applied, but the mamzer could not do that. There's some question that if a mamzer writes a Torah scroll, it's whether or not it's fit, and there's some other questions. Jack, I see you have your hand up, and I don't know if you can unmute yourself. I know you've tried that before, and unfortunately that you've had some difficulty with your computer. So I do see your hand, but we can't hear you unless you find a way to unmute yourself. Or I don't know if is there a chat? Eddie, is there a chat in this?
Yeah, there's a chat box.
Okay. Again, the only I make the suggestion that Jack, you can try to unmute or type it in the chat box. Okay. The Talmud understands 10 generations as meaning forever. So in other words, it's not just the saying, even to the 10th generation means forever. So what is the problem? So where does Rabbi Spitz begin? Okay, now he's first given a definition, but after he's given a definition, his first comment is, we have an ethical issue here, right? A marital pariah due to no fault of his own, but rather for the sins of his or her parents. That's not fair, is it? And he points out that even in ancient times, there was a recognition that this could be unfair. And he talks about in the Talmud about a verse about oppressions, and someone, Daniel Hanina the tailor, says, oppressions, these are the mamzerim. Their mothers committed a sin, and these humiliated ones are removed. This one's father had illicit sexual relations. What did the child do? Why should it make a difference? In other words, even in the times of the Talmud, they're saying, this is just unfair. Okay. God says, I have to comfort them because in the world they are besolet, refuse, but in the Messianic age, Latid Lavo, they are pure gold. Oh, everything will be okay in the Messianic age, which we could argue that doesn't do a lot for them. Oh, good, I'll be okay when the Messiah comes. The best you can do. So this is in the Messianic age they can marry anybody. Wonderful. All right. By the way, even in the Talmud, there's some debate about this. Rabbi Meir said no, and Rabbi Yossi said yes. This is clearly some theoretical split. As to whether this moral grievance should be eternally binding, or you have to wait for the Messianic age. Now we can also find some objection to this from some other sources. Where it says, and this is in Deuteronomy, the fathers shall not be put to death for the sins of their children, nor the children for the sins of their parents. Every person shall be put to death for his or her own sin. In other words, the Bible is teaching that everyone has. Well, if that's true, doesn't that give us a problem with mamzerut? Why are they being punished for something that their parents did? And they have some other issues in the Bible as well. The book of Ruth, right? There's a Moabite, and Moabites aren't supposed to marry Jews, marries an Israelite. Ruth marries Boaz. So the question is, if it says in the Torah there are problems with the Moabites becoming members of being part of the Jewish people, what about Ruth? And that Ruth's husband's ancestor, Peretz, was born from the union of Judah and Tamar, someone who was a mamzer. In other words, if we go into the biblical text, it's not so clear. Protecting children from suffering due to no fault of their own sins seems to conflict with the biblical statement that God remembers the sins of the father for 3 or 4 generations. And that's it. And the moral problem, and the words of Louis Jacobs. Louis Jacobs was a British rabbi, a very distinguished British rabbi. Even though the law does not necessarily see it as a penalty, the fact remains that it is a disability of the most serious nature, intolerable with a legal system that prides itself on its passion for justice. So Rabbi Jacobs is basically saying it's an internal, it's not like we're imposing an ethical standard from the outside to a rule in the Torah. The rules in the Torah itself are ethical, and we clearly have an internal conflict between the rules of the Torah, which talks about ethical treatment for all human beings, and this issue, and people being only punished for their own sins, and we have this mamzerut, right? And also, it deprecates the status of converts. By permitting a mamzer to marry a convert, but not a native-born Jew. Well, what does it say about converts? We always like to say, oh, people who convert to Judaism as good as any other Jew. And there's even some statements, you're not even supposed to remind someone that they converted to Judaism. Well, here's another contradiction, right? A person is not to be reminded that he or she is a convert, lest it cost embarrassment. Ona at hager. So there's another problem. That is another. Now here's a larger issue. How common was the issue of mamzerut in ancient times versus modern times? And here's Rabbi Spitz is going to add, it's not only an ethical issue, it's an ethical issue that has an internal contradiction within the Torah and the system of Jewish law itself, but we've got another problem. What is that? The number of people who qualify as mamzerim has proliferated. In America, there are many who are married by a rabbi, receive a civil divorce, but no Jewish divorce, and remarry a Jew, either with a justice of the peace or a reformer reconstructionist rabbi. As a conservative rabbi, I am forbidden to officiate at a wedding if one of the two parties has been previously married to a Jew and did not receive a Jewish divorce. Okay, no Orthodox rabbi will marry them, and no conservative rabbi. But hey, they could get married. Not only can they get married to justice of the peace or a reformer reconstructionist rabbi, they can have one of their friends become a rabbi, a clergy for the day, right? So that happens all the time. So the children of the subsequent marriage are technically mamzerim, although rarely was it the intent of the parents to knowingly violate the religious law. How many people even know this, right? If you would ask the average Jew in the street, would they even know about this? Or if they knew about this, what might they say? So what, right? There are a lot of Jews, okay? So in response to the problem of many Jews remarrying without a Jewish divorce, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who we've come across many times, one of the most foremost Orthodox rabbis in America for many years, ruled that non-Orthodox weddings were not binding. Now think of this ruling. Why is this a problematic ruling, and why did he do it?
It dilutes the validity of a conservative wedding.
That is correct. Or even a reform wedding if it was done by the book, shall we say, right? But but on the other hand, from his perspective, why is this a good thing? Why is it a good thing? Well, if you were not married and then you married again and had children, the children are not mamzerim because you weren't married the first time. Because the first time you got married by a conservative or reform rabbi, and I declare that those marriages are not valid marriages, then you get married again, it doesn't matter. Right? So, in other words, he's done two things. He's tried to solve the problem of their people being mamzerim, and at the same time, he's invalidating the religious validity of marriages officiated by non-Orthodox rabbis. Okay? Right? It solves the mamzer question for the Orthodox, but underscores the problem as conservative. Right? We recognize as religious binding between Jews who are married according to halachic standards. When these marriages end in civil divorce and no get is issued, then we have a problem of mamzerim. So we still have this problem. We have this problem. The Orthodox do not. There's a worse problem. There's a worse modern problem. Groups of Jews who have been removed from the main body of Israel, such as Israel B'nai Israel, the Ethiopian Falashes. I will also add, let's add to this all the Russian Jews. As these groups have not been instructed in the specifics of religious divorce laws, they are presumed to include Zerim within their numbers. Well, it seems pretty obvious. So now we have a greater. Now he does talk about that. There is a frightening proliferation of technical mamzerim on a scale that is completely unknown or even imagined in the classic period of the halacha. In addition, there's the creation of a caste of untouchables, which further divide the Jewish people. In other words, not only do we have an ethical problem, but we have a modern, real problem that these numbers are increasing, right? So how should Jewish law deal with both the ethical issues and the pragmatic issues? Now, you could argue, why are you talking about pragmatic? The Torah is eternal, timeless, and even if things change, you have to follow everything that's in the Torah. You could argue that. But there are really some difficult ones, and he's going to deal with some really difficult ones, some real cases that have occurred, and to see what you do. Now, he does first bring the case we just talked about, Rabbi Ashri, right? We just talked about that, right? He advised the man should cease being a rabbi. He should not be married to a Jew, and therefore he needed to divorce his wife, right? And by the way, now that's why we know now we know that first case was Australia, which we didn't know. Okay, that's one case, but he's giving more cases. You know what? This is hardly theoretical anymore, and this is hardly rare anymore. This is a little complicated. The Langer case in Israel, August 1951. Avraham Borokovsky, a convert, a person converted to Judaism, appeared with his wife Chava Borodovsky Langer before a bet din and applied for a religious divorce. Remember, in Israel, there's no civil marriage, there's no civil divorce. Personal status matters of that are only handled through religious courts, and the religious courts are Orthodox religious courts. So here's a couple, they want to get divorced. Okay. Although the couple had lived in Israel for close to 20 years, they had not lived together for many years. The religious court learned that in the intervening years, Hannah had married a second man. So I don't know, it's unclear. I mean, she had to, maybe she left Israel, and like a lot of Israelis, she went to Cyprus or some other country, and she had a wedding, not a Jewish one, but a wedding with a second man. And oh, well, okay, I'm sorry, had done so by lying about the marriage. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. She lied about the marriage. So in other words, she got married a second time without mentioning to the rabbi that she'd been previously married. Sorry, forget what I just said. I just got that wrong. Okay, believe me, I once had a couple come to me. They wanted me to do their wedding, and I think between the two of them, they'd been previously married 5 or 6 times. And I said, that's all very nice, but you don't have a get from any of these other ones. You're nice people, but I can't marry you. They eventually went to the Reform rabbi in my town and asked him to do the wedding. But okay. All right. So I'm sorry. I got that confused. All right. So she lied at the time of her second marriage. Okay. And had 2 children, Hanuk and Miriam. The Bet Din granted Avraham and Chava a divorce and declared that the children from the second marriage were mamzerim. Okay, is that clear? Any question about the situation so far? So now we have a public declaration: these 2 children are mamzerim. So now what? One of them wanted to get married. The Bet Din, the Jewish court of Petach Tikva, held that Chanuk's status as a mamzer remains unchanged, and he could not marry his Jewish fiancée. These are Israelis, mind you, right? The Supreme Religious Court affirmed it. And in Israel, what happened? It was a travesty of justice. A native Israeli, right? Chanuk was born in Israel. A man who had a bar mitzvah, had served in the Israeli army, should be prohibited from marrying a Jew because his mother lied when she married his father. Okay. So what happened? It's 1972. The chief Ashkenazic rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Goren, a very well-known figure, some of you may have heard of him before, issued a ruling. And in his name and the name of 8 other rabbis, whose names he refused to reveal, this is a very odd case, clearly, permitting them to marry. He justified his reversal of the earlier courts on the basis of new evidence that Avraham Borokovsky was an insincere convert, which meant that his Jewish marriage was nullified ab initio. In other words, it never happened, and hence the children were not mamzerim. Hear what Rabbi Goren did? He said, oh, you're a convert, you aren't sincere. However, there were some problems with that. Trying to find alludence here. I know I have some somewhere. Just give me a moment to find a cough drop. Well, they seem to have disappeared. Oh, well, okay. What's the problem with Rabbi Goren's decision? 1, Mr. Borokovsky did not have the opportunity to refute the charge that he had renounced his conversion, that he had reverted to Christianity. In fact, there was much evidence that he had conducted himself as a practicing Jew. So there's a question about this ruling. When there is new evidence, the normal procedure is to remand the case to the original Bet Din. And we have new evidence. It's like, a series of appeal courts. We have new evidence, go back to the original court, which they did not do. And what about these other rabbis? 8 other rabbis, telling us for their names? This is all very irregular. Wow. So what's going on here? Okay. The Langer case that reveals that there are many rabbis who feel bound by the law of mamzerut and are willing to enforce it. But then there are others, obviously Rabbi Goren, who did his best to find a way out, right? And not only that, the court system in Israel continues to keep lists of people who are labeled mamzerim. Can you imagine? There's an official computerized bank to trace persons of allegedly adultery or incest a generation ago or so. There are many Jews in our day who are technically mamzerim, and for some there are real consequences. What do you think about Rabbi Goren's decision? Do you think it was a good decision? Comments on that? Any question, comments? No comments? Good decision, bad decision? Do you think he made the right decision? Was he skirting the laws a bit, shall we say, by saying, I think this guy is not a severe convert without any real evidence? Why did he do that? And why didn't he tell us the names of the other 8 rabbis? Any suggestion? Yes, no? I would suggest that he looked at this case and said, here's the case of somebody who's an Israeli, served in the army, grew up as a Jew. I'm looking for any possible technicality I can, even if it's far-fetched, to be sure that these guys are not, that this guy is not named a mamzer. You know, he's looking for very slight openings, and he claims he found them. Okay. Okay, before discussing how this injustice can be corrected, let us look at the reasons offered and the attempts to ameliorate its impact. Okay, the reasons. Deterrence against promiscuity, right? It's supposed to be a deterrent against immoral behaviors, all right? Although they intend to limit adultery, the rabbis acting out of sympathy for the innocent victims almost eliminated its application to adultery. Listen, the Talmud says that a child of a married woman whose husband was absent during the gestation is presumed to be the lawful father. The rabbis, even in the Talmud, recognize this is problematic. Towards that end, Rabbi Tosfa'a, a 7th century Babylonian rabbi, held that a woman whose husband was away on travel was able to carry a fetus for 12 months. Everybody knows that that's not true. But again, notice there are rabbis who are looking for loopholes to prevent the application of mamzerut. An accuser had the burden of proof, which requires 2 witnesses to substantiate the charge. Oh, you say this woman committed adultery. I want 2 eyewitnesses to prove it. What's the likelihood of that? Again, as with Rabbi Goren, there are attempts to try to get around this. The general principle that a person's confession of his or her own turpitude is not admissible as legal testimony, the wife and mother could not be, by her assertion alone, classified as a mamzer. You know, it was the rare case where the husband was willing to demonstrate with witnesses that his wife's offsprings are not his own. Of course, we have DNA nowadays, right? In our day, mamzerim are overwhelmingly created as a result of Jewish ignorance or apathy and not promiscuity, right? I mean, let's face it. The majority is going to be a case where people just don't know about getting a get or something. You know, and if the rationale of mamzerut was to prevent promiscuity, it no longer does, and if anything, simply punishes the children of the ignorant who are committed to marriage. In other words, he's saying, and I think correctly so, does the issue of mamzerut prevent promiscuity in today's society? And he's just saying, you know, that rationale no longer holds. I mean, he's saying that rationale no longer holds. Should that they mean that we make a change? Well, that's the question. Okay. Communal purity is advanced. I'm not going to go to this in you know, through this, but the idea that you know, the Jew attaches great importance to the strength of family unit It is inconceivable to him that an element which might reduce the strength of this valuable asset be admitted into the family. No chances must be taken because too much is at stake. This is from Nachmanides. Again, highly unlikely to be an issue today. Okay, I'm sorry, comment? Is there a comment there? No? Okay. So here's some, so let's talk about some solutions. Now we recognize, A, it's an ethical problem. 2, the original rationale to prevent promiscuity is no longer hold. And 3, it's a very common problem. Okay, how? How can we solve the problem? So now we're going to see some possible solutions. The Talmud. Rabbi Tarfon says that the male mamzerim can be purified. How? A mamzer marries a non-Jewish slave woman, and the child born of this union will thus have the status of a slave. Let him then free that child from slavery, and the son will have the status of a free Jew. Rabbi Eliezer says that he will have the status of a slave who is a mamzer. So there's a little difference of opinion. By the way, well, what's the problem with this solution? Anyone? Doesn't this seem as silly to you as it seems to me? Oh, you're a mamzer. Simple. Marry a non-Jewish slave woman. What? You know, that is, shall we say, again, notice what he's trying to do. He's looking at the legal rules and trying to find a solution within the legal rules, but he has to, twist to the point of saying, what, you want me, you want me to marry of course, what's the problem nowadays?
Telling him to marry a non-Jew.
Or how about a slave?
Right.
There are a lot more non-Jews around than there are slaves, right? I mean, in other words, go ahead, Carol. I mean,
Ridiculous.
yeah, in other words, I have a law. I want to find a solution. I haven't found the solution, but the solution requires such a craziness that this is not a solution. This is not a solution. Okay. Another legal law solution. And that enables nullification of marriages that were performed legally, which would provide a positive solution. In other words, maybe we can find a way, if the problem is there was no get, there was no Jewish divorce in that first first marriage, maybe we can nullify. If we nullify it, right? Well, that's what Rabbi Goren tried to do. He nullified the wedding because the first husband wasn't a sincere convert. So again, I'm not going to go into this in any great details. Right. It's a very complicated matter, but again, just too complicated to propose. Another solution. How about civil marriages for mamzerim? If they can't have a wedding, why not have a civil marriage? But that denies a Jew a traditional Jewish marriage, right? Oh, you're a mamzer, fine. You can go find a justice of the peace. Bye-bye. The rabbi says bye-bye. That doesn't, that's not, okay. Nullification of the first marriage. Well, it only works if there was a defect in the original marriage. If you can find it, that's what Rabbi Goren did. He found a defect in the original marriage. But that's, again, very rare. Of course, Rabbi Feinstein addressed it and said that all the weddings had defects in them. But that's just not going to work for us. Narrow rules of evidence. Again, where's your witnesses that this was adultery? So that, again, somewhat far-fetched. But here's another suggestion. Implicitly ignoring mamzerut. Again, Rabbi Louis Jacobs. Rabbi Louis Jacobs, again, was a rabbi in England. At a time when he was going to be appointed to a very important position, but he was not really Orthodox. He was more of a conservative rabbi. So what happened? He was basically the Orthodox wouldn't recognize him. He formed his own synagogue, and a very successful one, which became the first conservative synagogue in London. So and he's a very brilliant thinker. And this is what he said, again, not that long ago. He only died about 30 years ago. Since the majority of Jews who wish to marry are not mamzerim, the rule of probability should be relied upon, right? The vast majority of Jews are not mamzerim. So someone comes to you, right? There are even rumors, quite persistent, that in pre-war days, some Orthodox rabbis would drop broad hints to non-mamzerim that they should emigrate to a community where they are not known and marry there. Imagine. Go to Australia. Nevertheless, a very good case can be made out for at least avoiding any investigation, the purpose of which is to uncover the identity of mamzerim. This is certainly the norm among Orthodox in most parts of the United States, where cases of mamzerim rarely occur because the Orthodox rabbis are intentionally perfunctory in their investigations. A couple comes to you. Are you Jewish? Yes. Were your parents Jewish? Yes. Okay, that's nice. Let's go on. Next question. Not, were your parents married before? Was there a get in a previous marriage by the one who was not your parent, but before your parent? In other words, oh, that's nice. Let's move on.
But,
Yeah, Carol?
truthfully, do rabbis really go into this? Do rabbis really ask whether there's a possibility of that one or the other of this couple are mamzers?
Well, let's say this. If you are strictly believing in the righteousness of the laws of mamzerut, and you believe that a mamzer cannot have a Jewish wedding and marry a Jew, then wouldn't you be obligated to be sure that that didn't happen? You could argue that, right? Now you could also argue, as Rabbi Louis Jacobs is arguing, don't ask. This is seriously, don't ask, don't tell. I don't want to know. Don't tell me about your parents. Oh, that's nice. Your mother was married before you were born. Okay, so let's go on. Right? But follow that. But if you sincerely believe in mamzerut, right, and a couple comes before you, well, first of all, I, as a rabbi, need to know that both members of this couple are Jews. So I will inquire about their parents. Right? Was their mother a Jew, or was their mother someone who converted to Judaism? Or if the mother was not a Jew, then there's an issue of status. Yes, because I can only perform a wedding between two Jews, I will inquire about their status, but not their parents. As to right. But if you believe that mamzerut is a real issue that you have to enforce, like any other Jewish law, then you would have to ask that question. So Rabbi Jacobs is saying, don't ask, right? In the aftermath of the Holocaust, for instance, it is remarkable how few cases of mamzerut arose. Think about that. That story we had last week, why didn't it happen to more people? The answer is, and Rabbi Spitz is suggesting, it did. Because people disappeared. Generally, it's true. When they disappeared, they were murdered. That's, by the way, that's what happened in Patzov, the little town that I'm researching. 4 people were arrested by the Nazis and taken out of Patzov before the deportations. And they all died. They all were murdered. But that didn't happen to every single one. There was one person of the 122 I'm trying to track down. One of them, I have no idea. He survived. He was liberated at Auschwitz and left no trace. Now, was he, again, that sort of thing happens. So he's saying, The rabbis in Israel and America actively ignored the issues of mamzerut, which we may surmise occurred in many cases in the shadow of those horrific years. Now, this is an assumption he's making, but I don't think it's very far-fetched. We have this one famous case with Rabbi Ashrei, but probably there are other cases. All right. We too may choose to ignore the category of mamzerut, but now he's going back. Oh, that's a very interesting idea, Rabbi Jacobs. But can we really do so if we're in full halachic integrity demands we justify our actions? So we need to address mamzerut. Okay, it is a problem. So the question is, how if we're not going to simply say ignore it, is there anything else we can do? So now he's going to try to say, well, maybe there might be something else we could do. And there's a fear to make a change. See, that's a if we make a change in mamzerut, are we saying impugning God, which would unravel the system? We have to make a change because God's law is immoral. What do you mean God's law is immoral? God's law is immoral here? Oh, wait a second. There are those who will say, well, doesn't that knock down the whole system? If God makes immoral laws, why should we observe any of them? Shouldn't they all be perfectly moral? And it's true. Even when the rabbis altered the law, they never abrogated it. They did not entirely eliminate. This is from Rabbi David Weiss Halivni, one of the great Talmudic scholars of modern times. So what do you do? What do you do? And once it is positive that a Torahic institution does not exist, one cannot talk about a normative process at all anymore. The authority of any legal system cannot tolerate picking and choosing which institutions are to be held and which are to be dropped. That's a real issue here. However, then he goes on. While the conservative Judaism would affirm that the Torah is divine, the revelation of Mount Sinai is seen as the beginning of a relationship and not its final word. Interpretation is understood as our communal attempt to understand the will of a compassionate divine power. In other words, from an Orthodox perspective, you cannot abrogate. But maybe this is something different as a conservative Jew. If a law appears unconscionable, we would say that the shortcoming is either our previous understanding or circumstances have so changed that the rule no longer meets in its intended result. We as conservative Jews can say that, but Orthodoxy cannot, right? The Orthodox would not consider a modern ethical sensitivities as sufficient grounds to change the law. For them, the law has been formulated over the centuries to be binding. The conservative movement maintains that purpose of the law in the first place is largely to concretize moral values, and so the specific form of the law can and should be changed if it is not effectively doing that. In other words, Agadah, our morals understandings should control the legal standings. I mean, look at the issue of women's place in the synagogue. We, as conservative Jews, have made significant changes in that. Now, on the one hand, the Orthodox movement has not, but on the other hand, they've made little inroads there, have they not? Where modern times, so now the mechitza is in the middle of the floor and the women are not in the balcony. So now women are taught Talmud and are able to decide issues for in other words, there are some changes, right? And this is a book about conservative Judaism. In some cases, changes are necessary to prevent or remove injustice, while in others, they constitute a positive program to enhance the quality of Jewish life. We affirm that the halachic process has striven to embody the highest moral principles. Now, admittedly, that is a slippery slope, right? Let's admit that. And also, by the way, admit that all slopes are slippery, right? Because if you can start changing, what do you do? And he points out that none of the technical solutions really help us. To choose not to implement Mamzerut requires humility, both in deference to the Torah and to the generations of rabbis who struggled with it. And yet Mamzerut challenges us to speak with courage and clarity about how Judaism unfolds and how to do change. Mamzerut is an opportunity to make explicit what was until now implicit, that morality is at the center of the halachic process. That's now, here he's saying, it's morality that determines where we go, and you just don't automatically say, this is what the law is, and we can't change it. He's basically trying to define, the approach to halakha Jewish law from the conservative movement, as opposed to the Orthodox route. And what he does, and we'll just have a few minutes to look at this, he says there's a toolbox of halakhic change. Actually, to say that the laws have never changed, well, that's not exactly true, because the rabbis in the Talmud, which came after the Torah, did some things which did make some changes. So to say that we are making some changes is not this radical new thing that just started last week, but we also have some precedent within the Talmudic tradition. Now you can argue, the rabbis of the Talmud could do this, but we can't because we're not as great as they are. Or you can argue, well, the rabbis in the Talmud did it. Let's see what they did. And maybe that application of how they did it could also give us ways of looking at modern issues. So again, that's a division between Orthodox and conservative. So what he does in this next section, he says, you know what? Let's go back and see when changes did happen. Is there something within the ways in which the rabbis of the Talmud looked at the laws of the Bible that might apply also as to we today look at this issue of Mamzerut, which actually brings us pretty much to the end of our time. So it's kind of, I know we're in the middle of something, but we will have to pick this up after Pesach. But that is just generally the question. To what degree do we have a moral sense, and a moral sense that is based on the Torah? And it's not a moral sense that came out of nowhere. Why do we have a moral sense? Because we're basing it upon what we've read in the Torah. And when we see those moral sense of what's in the Torah, we note that there's an inconsistency. There are some things that are in the Torah that are not consistently moral in the same way. So what do we do then? What did the rabbis do in the Talmud? Did what the rabbis do in the Talmud apply to us? Can we do something today? And we clearly have this issue today of Mamzerut, which creates this moral problem. But we'll have to take a look at that in our next session. Okay, any comments or questions? No comments. Everyone's so quiet today. Okay. All right. Well, I hope you were all set and all getting ready for Pesach. Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Have a wonderful holiday. We'll see you in 2 weeks, and have a wonderful time in between. Hopefully you'll have a good time to be able to spend it with friends and with families. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Same to all of you.
Rabbi.
Well,